One of the more controversial moments during the Emirates Great Britain Sail Grand Prix in Portsmouth was in race 6. After the start, they'd rounded the first mark and were heading down to gate 2 on leg 2. You've got a lot of boats packed into a small area, and Canada took a jibe onto starboard, forcing Denmark across. Great Britain snuck round the front, but Australia, who were the boat furthest across, were the ones awarded the penalty. Tom Slingsby understandably didn't like this. And so today I've got Craig Mitchell, the chief umpire at SailGP, on the line so we can talk through the whole process of how this decision was made and also see if it was correct. Craig, welcome.
Yeah, nice to be with you, Mark.
It was high-speed action we saw in Portsmouth, and you've got to make decisions very, very quickly. How did you come to the decision where you've got 4 boats coming in, 2 jibing onto starboard, 1 sneaking round the front, that Australia, the boat on the outside, was at fault in this situation?
Yeah, it's a very tricky situation. The way we're set up, we've got 6 umpires in the booth. We've got 1 person dedicated to watching doing the television replay, and then we have 4 umpires making the decisions, and myself kind of overseeing, managing all the other aspects of the race. And jumping in when I need to. In this particular scenario, we had 1 umpire that made the call on this one. The other umpires are focusing on other areas. I was actually currently managing the penalty, the OCS penalty for Brazil. So we have 1 umpire that makes this call. So the situation comes up. They take the call. They reviewed it at the time, which is why it took about 30 seconds to come out. Normally we're aiming for 7 to 10 seconds, but this is a really fiendish puzzle to unpick. And so it took about 30 seconds to unpick it. We then came out with the penalty for Australia.
The crux of this decision is Rule 19 and who gives way. But with SailGP, with the F50s, the speeds are so high, there's got to be an element of prediction on board that people are going to be jibing onto starboard to come into the gate. And so it gets quite complex.
It does get pretty tricky, and we see this the half of this maneuver. So we often see that boat that's ahead or windward that's jibing from port then becomes right of way. And often we'll see it between just 2 boats. This time we had 4 boats involved total. And so then where we get into is Rule 19, which talks about obstructions. And as Canada jibe onto starboard, they become an obstruction to those other boats. And so Rule 19 is triggered between Canada, Denmark, GBR, and Australia. And so they say, well, who's the inside boat? Which side are they passing this obstruction? And who's going to required to give room to who? Essentially, we look at it, and as they go through, the issue just knocks onto the outside each time. So you ask each one the question. Denmark come through the jibe because they need to. They're entitled to avoid Canada. So then they come in to join the melee, and then you've got GBR and Australia, and Denmark's still a giveaway boat. They still got to keep clear of Canada, and so then the pressure goes on to GBR. GBR are then looking at it, going, well, what do I do to get out of here? Denmark actually curtail their turn. They end up dead downwind, and then they end up turning back again. GBR look at it and go, well, we've got a boat on the outside, Australia coming up. We want to go left turn at the bottom. We've got to keep clear of these starboard boats. What do we do? And so when we looked at it, Australia do decide that they're going to go into the right turn. But as Denmark, get down to turning onto starboard, we want to have seen Australia already expanding the gap between Australia and GBR. Now there's the room between Australia and GBR. That's where we want to see Australia diverge. It's not a case of, well, if GBR turn down, then we'll turn down with them and give them the room. We want the boat that has to give the room to actively be giving the room. We've discussed this. We have debriefs and briefings with the teams about, who needs to do what and when. And we're always talking about protecting the boat entitled to the room. So we want the boat that has to give the room to be giving that room actively, not saying, well, if you come and turn closer, then I'll get out of your way. Because at these speeds, there is a certain element of trust. But at the same time, if GBR just turned straight into Australia, then there could be trouble. So everyone's trying to tiptoe around this whole scenario. And, we say we protect the guy that's entitled to the room. And this actually, it's quite early on in the piece when we want to see Australia turning. Essentially, as soon as their board hits the lock, they should be, bailing out. But, they're not. And it takes another 2 seconds for them to start their turn. And at that point, Denmark are already turning down back towards Canada. GBR, they're looking at this situation. And at that point, probably going straight around and through, is probably their option. If you look at the ghost boats on our on the UmpApp, you see that GBR, they're doing 75 kilometers an hour versus Denmark's 50, Canada's 56. So they're actually probably through and gone. So is it better for them to carry on or not? They don't turn down. They do look like a villain in this piece. But Australia were the ones that we said, well, you have to look at it earlier. But it's not easy for Australia, because when you go back to the point at which Canada become the starboard boat, Australia probably can only just see Canada, but they might not be sure exactly which way they're pointing. And then when Denmark turn down and get onto starboard, Australia are probably blocked from seeing which way they're going by the wing of GBR. So they're looking at this piece going, well, I'm aiming for my right turn. I've got a boat to weather. If they turn, I can turn, but they don't see the incoming nightmare. And so their turn down, is then too late, because of the point at which they actually do turn. It's already, Denmark's already taken the avoiding action. So they weren't given the room on Canada. So we pile it on, Australia get the hospital pass. I mean, you could look at it and go, well, actually, should we go back to the beginning and say, well, Canada, when they become the right-of-way boat, they've got to give everybody else room to get out of the way. But, we've discussed this situation. You've got to be ready to go at a moment's notice. You've got to, the rules don't say you have to anticipate, but really, if you want to stay on your foils, then you need to anticipate. We've said you can turn, you can park your boat off the foils. Flight controller can just take the gain off. They can land the boat, and Canada lands the boat. Denmark lands the boat. You don't get the room to be going at full speed. You have to be ready to turn. And so, it goes out to the outside edge. But, should Canada have given more room? Did Denmark turn too soon? Should they have gone a little bit closer to Canada? But then why should they? They're just trying. They're aiming straight down the middle, trying not to hit anyone, And so you go, well, it must be GBR then, because they just yeehaw through. And maybe they're a little bit to blame, but the rule says that that Australia have got to give them the room, and that means that if Australia turns sooner and there's that room for GBR to turn, and it's probably they need to turn 2 seconds earlier than what they did, maybe 2.5. If they generate that room already, then it's all on GBR because Australia have already preemptively given them the room. In which case, it's on the hook with GBR.
You've got this almost contradictory situation here where Australia come up initially towards GBR.
Yeah.
And then Australia put their port foil down. The Brits don't put their foil down. And so it's almost like straight away they're going to take the yeehaw option, as you put it, straight through. And it does look like the Australians are ready for that jibe, but they just delay it by 2 seconds.
And that could be because they're looking at hitting their ley line, because because the awareness of the incoming Canada and Denmark are that, well, we're racing, we're hitting our ley line, and there we go. And if GBR push down on us, then we can turn at a moment's notice. There's only so much anticipation before you stop racing. And so they're all out there racing as hard as they can. And so how much do you want them to back off? And at that point, are you still racing?
Now, I understand this is a single umpire making a decision in the heat of the moment, but when you've reviewed it as a group, I understand you've come to the same decision as to where the penalty would lie.
Yeah, we did discuss this one, and it took us probably longer than the race takes, so probably more than 10 minutes to kind of go through it all, unpick it, think, was it GBR, was it Australia, was it Canada, was it Denmark? And we were all comfortable with the call in the end, but we don't have that luxury. We can't just stop play, and so we have to make that decision. Now, if we have an incident that comes up and we then review it whilst the penalty is still active, then we can cancel that penalty, or we can signal that penalty is complete. If we think there's been an error, and we have done that in the past, the system we've got with all the technology, we can look back in time. So if we have made an error and we recognise that, then we can say, right, we're going to cancel this penalty and move on. And what happened in the end is the penalty went on, and then Canada went up to the boundary, they tacked, and then they came off the foils, and that massively increased the penalty as well. And so at that point, you look at it and say, well, actually, should Australia have to go behind Canada, even though Canada have come off the foils of their own volition? And so at a certain point, you say, well, actually, no, we think that's enough, and then we can, signal the penalty complete, which is what then happened. But that still puts Australia to the back of the fleet.
And you do a debrief with the teams with incidents like this so that things can be discussed and you can help the skippers, the strategist, understand why the decision was made and also how you can improve things in the future.
Yeah, it's vitally important that we do debriefs. I mean, we're in Ealing, so we're not on site, and sometimes it's nicer to sit down with the teams face to face to be able to do that, but we don't have that option. So we use the technology we got available, and we always have an online debrief, and we do that after every race day. So the debriefing of this one will be just before the next event, because of schedules, etc. But it's very vitally important that we have the briefings and the debriefs, so we can go through the call, say this is what we saw, this is why we made the call, and gather feedback from the teams. We're not on site, we're not out on the water, we're not on board the boats, so we need as much information from the teams as possible about how these boats handle, what's possible, what's not possible, how nervous they are. One of the coaches suggested we get a leaf blower in the booth just to show the conditions on site, because as the breeze comes up, people get nervous, they don't want to be as close, and so you'll find that the keep clear distances are expanding and contracting because when the breeze is high, the nervousness is high. We don't want to force people to be running into each other. We've worked really hard on making sure that we have as few crashes as possible. That's why the penalty points for crashes are so high. So teams don't want to get close. So we need to make sure that we give the penalties at the right time for those right keep clear distances. So the feedback from the teams is vital to us. So we'll go through this one saying, is this rule working how it should? Now, Rule 19 is a bit of a blunt tool, really, to solve this. And in this case, you might say, well, it got the wrong person. So do we have to look at that? Do we have to revise it? Do we have to discuss whether we can penalise more than one boat? We're here to shape the rules to fit the racing that we're doing. And the input from the teams is absolutely vital.
And lastly, I presume you haven't got any holidays booked in Australia in the near future?
Not currently, but maybe in the future I'll get allowed back in.
Good luck with that. I think your visa may be slow to arrive.
Cheers, Mark.
Well, thanks. Many thanks for your time. It's really good to get the insights as to what happens in these high-speed situations and how you, the teams and SailGP are reviewing situations in a very dynamic way. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, it's good to kind of try and do an explanation. We don't always get the opportunity, and certainly it's hopefully good for the fans. I think this will create some discussion. Not everyone will agree, and we don't expect everyone to agree. Everyone has their opinion on who is right and wrong, and there's more to discuss. So maybe there'll be more discussion based on this, and to create. And it's good to explain to the fans out there what we've done and why we've done it. We like to be open and you know, and clear and explain what we do.
Brilliant. Many thanks indeed, Craig.
Cheers, Mark.
This event we've seen people take a left turn. Italy are going to lead out the left turn, and it's really tight in the middle. Rockwool Denmark with a little flip-flop jibe happening there. Had to avoid Emirates Great Britain. Dylan Fletcher once again has got himself back in the race.
So that was a replay of the incident in real time, together with the commentary. And we've heard there from Craig, the chief umpire. Tom Slingsby understandably was pretty annoyed, and we got this reaction from him after the racing.
Yeah, well, we obviously didn't even see Canada. They're not sort of in our vision. They're 3 boats apart. I've just seen the footage now, and for me, I'm still shocked that we got the penalty. GBR didn't even attempt to jibe. If they went board down and tried to jibe, we've got to avoid, but they didn't. They kept their board up. They wanted to go left turn and try to cross. That's not our fault. Yeah, so that sort of cost us the finals, and yeah, another baffling decision.
Please give us your comments on whether you think the decision made was right or wrong, and what SailGP could maybe do to make incidents like this more understandable for the public, and also just how they could slightly change the rules to make it maybe fairer. We've got all of the reporting from SailGP in Portsmouth on sailworld.com and yachtsandyachting.com, and please do subscribe to our channel using the button down here. Many thanks indeed for watching.